Hi, everybody, and thanks for coming out this evening. Tonight's guest is curator and writer Jens Hoffmann. Jens Hoffmann is the director of the Wadis Institute for Contemporary Art at the California College of Arts in San Francisco. From 2003 to 2007, Hoffmann was the director of exhibitions at the Institute of Contemporary Art in London. He has curated and co-curated over 36 exhibitions internationally since 1997. Jens is currently the curator of the San Juan, Puerto Rico Triennial, an exhibition of Latin American and Caribbean art due to open in April of 2009. Jens Hoffmann has also written more than 150 texts on art and curatorial practice for art magazines and museum publications over the last decade, including A Certain Tendency of Curating, as well as one of my students' favorites, The Next Documenta Should Be Curated by an Artist. The topic of tonight's lecture is What is a Curator? It is with great pleasure that I welcome and introduce you to Jens Hoffmann.
Another exhibition that maybe relates to this, but this is 2 years after, is the exhibition Surprise, Surprise. And that's kind of interesting and sort of slightly strange story or background to this exhibition. At the beginning of 2006, we had a new director who came to the ICA, and he asked me to put together the exhibition plan for the upcoming year. And while I had already planned the shows for the spring and the fall, I hadn't any show scheduled for the summer. And just in order to satisfy him, I called the slot, I just wrote in the thing, Surprise, Surprise, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. But then once I kind of did this, I felt like, well, what could a show look like that would be surprise, surprise? You know, what could the show be like that is about a surprise? So the director kind of asked me to make an exhibition that would guarantee us a really big audience for the summer months. And he kind of requested from me that I would bring in very well-known artists. I was sort of thinking a lot about talking to him about it, and it sort of like really became clear that, you know, he was under pressure from the board, that we sort of had to work on our audience figures, and that they wanted to see more people coming through the galleries, and somehow wanted to have a blockbuster exhibition that would, you know, bring a lot of money in and a lot of audiences. And his idea was that this would be achieved through having a lot of famous artists presented at the ICA. I kind of like was thinking about a way of how to make that interesting for myself and how, somehow, you know, fulfill his directions, but at the same time also subvert it in some way. And the result of that was this exhibition, Surprise, Surprise, that I'm going to show you now. So what I did was I invited, I think, about 40 of the most well-known and most famous artists in the world that are practicing right now. But I asked each of those artists to give me a work that would be absolutely not representative of what they're famous for, an artwork that was completely off the grid. And they were all artists who are famous for one particular thing, artists that have a very particular style. You know, some like Murakami, which everybody associates with these crazy manga figures, who then in this show presented a completely different work. So that's also, of course, how we related this whole idea to Surprise, Surprise. That you sort of like play with the expectations of the audience. You sort of like play with these devices that museums and art institutions use in order to promote their exhibitions. You know, like often using names of artists as sort of marketing devices and trying to bring in audiences and by sort of like fueling expectations of, oh, okay, this is a Matthew Barney show, or Damien Hirst show, or Gerd Richter show. And you know, the audience sort of like recognizing this name, wanting to see this, even though I already know what they're going to see, because all of these artists have a particular signature style. So here we sort of like try to do the opposite and play with this idea. And the works that we were showing somehow related to a lot of the works that the artists usually do, but in kind of unexpected ways, perhaps. I kind of pushed it even a little bit further by not having any labels on the walls. So not only did these works not look like what you would normally know from those artists, but you would also not be told who actually made these works. And the reason why I did this was that I kind of felt like that if you would look closely and if you would examine these works in a more serious way, you actually, if you know a little bit about these artists, actually find traces of the artists' works that they are known for, somewhere in between these rather obscure pieces. And when you left the institution, one of the museum guards would give you a booklet with photographs and diagrams and descriptions of the pieces, so you could actually sort of see which piece was made by whom. And you could also go back with the brochure and sort of like see the whole exhibition again, but then, actually knowing who made what piece. I mean, here, for example, you have this painting, this drawing on the left. This is like a painting by Wolfgang Tillmans, who was, very famous for his photographs and who, in his earlier work, often took photographs of celebrities. So this is like a photograph. This is a painting by one of the Pet Shop Boys, for example. In the vitrine, you have this wig, which is a wig made of the hair of Keith Richards, a piece by Richard Prince, and he made a whole magazine about his relationship to Keith Richards, and wearing the wig of Keith Richards together with Keith Richards. And the whole magazine is about Richard Prince's obsession with Keith Richards. This is one of the photographs of Andreas Gursky, who, of course, is well known for large-scale photography, but usually he would photograph architecture or landscapes and things like this, and here would be the page of a book. And this is interesting. I spoke to Andreas Gursky and explained to him the idea for the show, and he says, "Oh, Jens, I have a really good piece for you. This is a piece my gallery never wants to show, and no one else ever wants to show, because they always say, oh, this is not really a Gursky. But I really like the piece, and I think it's perfect for the exhibition." So, like, all of a sudden, I get these kind of responses from artists where they say, I've done this piece, I really like this piece, but no one ever wants to show it because it doesn't look like me or like what people expect. And I kind of really tapped into a niche there, because all of a sudden these people really came out with like the weirdest things that you would have never expected. So this is a page from The Man Without Qualities, a novel by the Austrian writer Robert Musil. And it actually, in the text, describes a street scene in Vienna, something that you would kind of maybe find usually represented in a photograph by Gursky. So this is sort of like a piece where I think, if you know that Gursky is in the exhibition and you know what type of photography he does and you know that he does large-scale photography, you might actually figure out that this is his work. You all know this kind of thing, and probably we all have done it many times. It's like, if you don't know the work of an artist that you see in a museum or an exhibition, the first thing you do, sometimes even before really looking at the piece, is going to the label, trying to check out who the artist is, which year the piece was made, etc., etc. Just sort of like to be able to contextualize it and to see what you're actually looking at. And of course, it provides a lot of information. But it's also interesting when that sort of device is taken away and really opens up for completely different possibilities of looking at art. And I also already mentioned the press in England, and what was interesting was that several newspapers sent their art critics into the exhibition and kind of made tests on them and said, like, okay, now you figure out who these artists are. And even for the critics, it was quite a challenge to figure this out. The Murakami piece, for example, was like actually a really beautiful piece. And I'm not really a big fan of Murakami's work now, but the piece that he made or that he presented in the exhibition was an early triptych of paintings that was, much more sort of like almost like a Zen aesthetic. It was sort of like a beautiful monochrome silver painting that was painted gold on the back, and these two colors would sort of create these really beautiful reflections on the wall. A very beautiful piece.